Hello, and thank you for joining us. We're waiting for a few more people to join, and we'll be starting in a few minutes. Thank you so much. Hello, and thank you for joining us for our first Level Up webinar, The Power of Modern Apprenticeship, brought to you by Forbes. Before we begin, I want to cover just a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application widgets you can use throughout the webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. We do capture all submitted questions, so we'll be able to view these during the webinar, and we'll address as many as we can during the Q&A portion. If you have any technical difficulties, please click the Help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical issues. Now that we've gotten that taken care of, let's get started. Thank you for joining us for our first Level Up webinar, The Power of Modern Apprenticeship. My name is Kim Horner, and I'm a social media editor here at Forbes. My guest today is Nicholas Wyman, and he's the CEO of the Institute of Workplace Skills and Innovation. He's a workforce development and skills expert, speaker, and author of the award-winning book, Job U, a practical guide to finding wealth and success by developing the skills companies actually need. Nick is a leader in developing skills-building mentorship and apprenticeship programs that close the gap between education and careers around the world. Thank you so much for being here today, and especially for agreeing to be our first Level Up guest presenter.
Hey, Kim. Well, great to be here, and thank you to all the people who are joining the conversation with us. There's a lot going on with apprenticeship, and I thought we'd just start off by going through the agenda and talking about what we're going to cover today. So the viewers should be able to see what we're going to talk about. What is an apprenticeship? I think that's really important, Kim, to get that one out on the table. I mean, it's certainly not a reality television show. This is the real world. Who would benefit? And I think that, I'm hoping by the end of our conversation today that apprenticeship will resonate with the listeners. We'll talk about the industries, particularly where apprenticeship is growing and some of the myths and misconceptions. And finally, we'll wrap up with how you can land an apprenticeship. And of course, Kim, one of the important things is we really want this to be interactive. So looking forward to getting some questions from people who have tuned in today.
Great, thank you. Let's get started.
So what exactly is an apprenticeship? So you should be able to see a definition on the slides there, and I think a formal definition is an apprenticeship is a structured accreditation program that provides participants with the building blocks to master a specific occupational area and learns hands-on under the direct supervision of a skilled expert with related instruction. Kim, that is not going to be the scene for today. I just thought I'd give the technical description, and now I'll tell you what it really means. An apprenticeship means you can earn and learn, and you can put what you've learnt in the classroom into practice straight away.
Now, quick question. How exactly is an apprenticeship different from an internship?
Good question. There's a lot of confusion, and I think that internships are generally short-term. Unfortunately, many internships, Kim, involve little or no pay. And they're also quite inconsistent across the board concerning rigour and, I suppose you could say, the degree of responsibility that the person's undertaking in the workplace. You hear these horror stories of interns making cups of coffee, and that's certainly not what an apprenticeship is about. And also the levels of supervision. So apprenticeships are structured and they're coordinated. So I thought we'd dive into just a little bit of history about apprenticeship. And apprenticeship is one of the Western world's oldest traditions in education. And there's some people working from left to right on the slides. Well, Paul Revere is not on the slides, but Paul Revere was apprentice to a silversmith. And we've got Benjamin Franklin there, who was apprenticed as a printer. And then you've got the person who revolutionised the auto industry, Henry Ford. And he founded the Ford Motor Company, I think it was in 1903. And he started his career not in a classroom, but as an apprentice machinist. And to more modern day, I don't think we'll dwell too much on history here, but we've got Stella McCartney, who is a renowned fashion designer who learned her craft from the best in Savile Row in London.
And she's actually the daughter of Paul McCartney, so you may have heard of her.
Right, that I did not know, so I need to do my research a little bit better. But I do know that Stella did something with the London Olympics and did some work with Adidas and some really interesting design work. And yes, that is a photo of me as a young apprentice chef. I started my career not in a classroom, but actually in a kitchen. And you might have picked up in my accent, I was originally from Australia. This is not a Brooklyn accent. And what that really did for me is it gave me an opportunity to build skills and confidence and also develop some financial independence. And it was a really interesting time for me. My father was a university professor, and he thought I'd follow his footsteps, and he did a lot to really try and dissuade me from anything that wasn't academically focused. And I really wanted to learn by doing, and I think that it's important for people to realise that people following an apprenticeship pathway, it's not about a consolation prize or second best. It just means that people have different ways to learn. And so, my culinary years were nipped in the bud by my well-meaning parents. And so luckily for me, there was a family friend who owned a restaurant, and he really introduced me to this culinary world. And I ended up at the Ritz in London, which was an interesting thing. I must say, it certainly wasn't fine cuisine. You hear about afternoon tea at the Ritz, and I was a bit disappointed. I don't know if it's the case now, but they used to make scones or scones, used to make scones from packet mix, so I was quite devastated when I saw that. But I also worked at Claridge's in London and at a hotel in Scotland, and I actually got to represent my country in the Culinary Olympics. Yes, there are Culinary Olympics. So a team of 4 Australians went off to Frankfurt in Germany, and we got to compete against other countries. So, apprenticeship's been around for a long time. I've been around for a few years. This was back in the 80s. Things have changed. But, the apprenticeship experience and the skills that I learned, I use every day.
That's so interesting. So now, before we go on, I want to take a moment to find out about the audience. Where are you in your career? We have a quick poll, and if you can take a few minutes to answer. We want to know where you are. Current student, seeking a promotion, unemployed, seeking employment, changing careers, re-entering the workforce. Just take a moment to answer the poll that you see on your screen, and we could find out where everyone is.
So can I click to? Can people click to?
No.
Can you click all? Are you allowed to click every?
We have an other section. If
an other.
Really
right. Right. So if you kind of want to click, have a bet each way, you could click other.
All right, so let's go to the results. Hopefully everyone had enough time to answer. Wow, okay. So it looks like we have 23% are current students or recent grads looking to enter the workforce, 26% seeking promotion, 19% unemployed seeking employment, 26% changing careers, and about 3% re-entering the workforce. So it's a pretty good mix.
Yeah, okay. So it is a good mix, and I think it really reflects where people are today. That apprenticeship is not just for school leavers, and there is a misconception out there. And I think that, I'm surprised to see that there's so many people who are changing careers. That really, I think, seems to be an area where apprenticeship offers a lot of opportunity. So it might be somebody who has had a professional background. When I was writing my book, I got to meet many interesting people doing some really interesting things who had careers as accountants and even lawyers. I don't know why a lot of lawyers want to change careers mid-career. I'm not sure what that's all about. And so I think we'll see who could benefit from an apprenticeship. And I think, from the poll, I think whether people are currently unemployed or unhappily employed and possibly listening at work, or might be listening to this at a later stage, or underemployed. That's a huge issue at the moment. There's a lot of people who are working on a casual basis who would like to find full-time work or employment. Or, as I said, people simply wishing to experience the joy of learning through hands-on work. And if you're answering yes to any of those, apprenticeship might be right for you. And some of the people that I met, Kim, during writing my book, went from occupations which would be, described as almost medieval. I went to the UK and met a group of apprentices who were actually restoring World War II vintage aircraft. And they were, of course, having to use some modern technology because, of course, you don't want to put 1943 wiring into an old warbird. And some incredible stories. I remember there was an older gentleman who came out of the tea room and had solved a problem in that there's a type of cloth that covers the wiring that winds through a Spitfire. And he came out dunking it in his cup of tea because they were looking how to dye this particular cloth. There's another trade called doping, which has gone away, and no, it's not what people are thinking. It's about stretching linen over plywood. But, there are a few apprenticeships like that, but there's also a lot of apprenticeships in high-tech careers, in automotive, cyber. And just this week, I was talking to some people from the BMW plant in South Carolina. Another area where there's a huge number of apprentices. There's actually 50,000 apprentices in the state of California, and California as a state and the West Coast has always had a strong connection to apprenticeship. I thought we'd talk a little bit about misconceptions just here with apprenticeship. That earlier on I alluded to the fact that quite often you talk to people about what an apprenticeship is, and I once gave what I thought was one of the best presentations of my career in Singapore. And 45 minutes into the presentation, I threw to the audience and said, "Are there any questions?" And a person in the third row put up her hand and said, "How long have you worked for Donald Trump?" And I kind of took one step backwards and thought, what is she talking about? And realised that I didn't describe what an apprenticeship is. And sadly, the audience thought that I was talking about a reality television show. But people also think when you say the word apprenticeship, they think about possibly union, they think about building and construction. And there's been a lot of great apprenticeships created around the country in building construction. And that's a large portion of the apprenticeships available today. But there's also this new and emerging industry. So we might come back to that a little bit later. And just finally, just to wrap up this slide, I thought that I'd mentioned that talking of the UK before, that apprenticeships in that country are not just for men. In fact, there's more female apprentices in the UK than there are men. And another misconception is that, as I mentioned before, that apprenticeships are just for young people or youth apprenticeship or school leavers. If you look to Australia, 50% of the apprentices in that country are over the age of 25. So apprenticeships are really for people at all ages and all stages of life. What skills can I learn? So there's a couple of hard skills there which I think are fairly self-explanatory. And I think that regardless of what career or occupation, math and computer literacy are going to be important in every occupation moving forward. And then, of course, there's always the technical aspect of the role. But another thing that you pick up from apprenticeship is you pick up soft skills. And I think that we've all heard of soft skills. There's been plenty of things in the media. In fact, I've written on my blog on Forbes.com actually about some of these soft skills: leadership, communication, and collaboration. But this morning, before I jumped on here, I thought I'd ring a few employers and say, well, what are the skills that you're really looking for in a new hire? And a really interesting list came up, actually. Curiosity is a soft skill which the employers that I spoke to this morning said they're looking for in a new hire. Something that I really need to focus in on is focus. Not wandering off the path, and attention to detail are soft skills that you could learn during an apprenticeship. And also the ability to change and adapt, and we'll talk a little bit more about the changing nature of work. So all of these soft skills can be learned through on and off the job training, and particularly apprenticeship. So how are we going, Kim? I think we're sort of nearly, we're sort of 20 minutes in. I see that we're getting a lot of questions, and I think we might go through one or two more slides, and then we might dive into a few questions from the listeners, see what people are interested in hearing about. So it's not just me talking to you and the microphone here in the studio. So, okay, so one of the things I thought is that yesterday I was down in Washington and did a piece on NPR. And people always want to know, so, what can I earn? And there was caller after caller talking about how they've earned six-figure salaries. And there was a couple who were actually talking about significantly more. And these were people who hadn't gone through a 4-year college degree. And I think that when you look at taking on an apprenticeship, I think particularly during the training, I think it's really valuable to look at the pay as a training wage. And if you go to a college, you would generally take on some student debt. And the student debt sits around $30,000 for the individual, and it's not great for the economy either. I mean, the student debt across the US now is pushing $1.3 trillion. And so I think that, employers who've invested in you as an apprentice will not want to let you go, because for them it's about not only attracting you but retaining and developing you. So I think that there are pay scales, and I think it's fair to say that people would earn solid incomes. And it really is dependent on the industry, dependent on the location. If you're in a major city and you've got an occupation like you're an electrician behind you, I don't know, maybe people might have heard of these stories of electricians and people in trades and what they're able to charge, because there really is a skill shortage. And I think that's where an opportunity lies across the US at the moment. We're still seeing this huge skills gap where we've got around 7 million people unemployed, yet there's 7 million jobs that employers can't fill. And that's known as the skills gap. And I think that really offers opportunity to people because there are employers out there who are looking to take people on. I just wanted to just touch on, before we move on to the next slide, and talk about the changing shape of our workforce and the impact of globalization and technological change. Robotics, big data. I think, the listeners may have seen some media out there with Bill Gates saying, let's tax the robots and maybe there should be some universal income. But I really don't see, the future of work being jobless. What I see is that some jobs are going to become obsolete. but many tasks within the jobs are going to change, but the jobs will still exist. And I think what's important to note there is that the skills that you can learn in the workplace through an apprenticeship are skills that you're going to be able to carry through regardless of where the future of work goes. So, I'm really into the future of work at the moment, and I'm writing a new book on it, and so it gives me the opportunity to travel around the country and talk to a lot of people about what they're experiencing. Earlier I mentioned some of the occupations. This is pretty self-explanatory, this slide. I mean, you can pretty much take on an apprenticeship in any of these occupations. The more popular and the growth areas I see are IT and, of course, cybersecurity for obvious reasons. I think, we've seen plenty of issues there, and that's an industry that really is looking on how to take in the best and the brightest people. And, the focus is not on the qualification a person has on a piece of paper. It's the ability that they bring to the job and the enthusiasm. And a lot of the tech employers I talk to are really rethinking the way they bring people into the workforce. And an example of that would be companies like IBM. IBM's worked with the City University of New York and the New York Department of Education, and created a model back in 2011 called PTech, which started in Brooklyn. And that's a model which is really teaching high school students about STEM careers. And what's really important there is that employers are getting involved in these conversations in high school. So maybe we might not need to have this conversation in the years to come if models like PTech grow. And I think last check there's about 80 PTech schools, and there's actually 14 in my homeland in Australia. So there is some good news for high school students out there, and that's well worth checking out.
So we're getting some questions in. Is an apprenticeship a must if you want to succeed as an entrepreneur?
Yes. I think in simple, I met a Swiss-Italian by the name of a gentleman, Sergio Emotti, a couple of weeks back, actually, here in New York City. And he left school at 15, as many people do in Switzerland, and took on an apprenticeship in banking and finance. And Sergio is now the CEO of UBS, Kim, which is actually the largest bank in Switzerland. So that's a very long story. To get to your question, is an apprenticeship a must if to succeed entrepreneurial? Yes. So Sergio talks about how an apprenticeship can equip people with a solid base for an entrepreneurial career and an entrepreneurial mindset. So, if people just, put his name into a search engine, he writes some really interesting things. I think he's actually written a couple of blogs on Forbes, actually, I noticed this morning. And I think it's fair to say that, to finish off this industry's slide, that we're going to see a larger variety of apprenticeships in the United States very soon. And I work in the UK and in Australia. And in those countries, you'll see that if you talk about, say, an apprentice as an automotive technician, so this is someone who's servicing your car, the first thing you'll notice is that there's a large variety of occupations within an automotive dealership. So it's not just about servicing the car. You've got people in those countries who are apprenticing in finance, in sales, in spare parts interpreting. Interpreting, that's a big word. Interpreting, it's probably not correct English, but anyway. That might be coming back from my chefing days. But I think you're also seeing people in panel. And that's an industry that really suffers from misconceptions. People think that automotive is about grease and grime, but it's actually about diagnostics. And so people who are looking to get into the automotive industry, really need to understand, what's going on with these companies. And And I think that we're going to see some news this week, which is going to spur on employers to create more apprenticeships. So we're coming up to question time. Maybe we might just take on one or two more slides. We're nearly at the end of the deck here. This is a graph of apprenticeships in the US over the last few years, and the good news is that the apprenticeship opportunities are growing. You'll see that people who are in apprenticeships, there's more opportunities becoming available. But what I would say about this slide is that about 80,000 of the people in these programs are actually in the US military. So that's not something that many listeners would be able to sign up and take on an apprenticeship there, or it might come with some some other strings attached. But I think that there's also a lot of apprenticeships in building and construction. But as I said, there's a lot more variety of apprenticeships starting to become available, and certain states, we're really seeing rapid growth. But how many apprenticeships do I think are going to be in the US if we look at this slide in the next sort of 3 to 4 years? My prediction is we're on the cusp of a major boom. Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, about a month back called for a moonshot goal of 5 million apprenticeships across the US, so from 500,000 to 5 million. And people thought, he's crazy. How can you take something from 500,000 to 5 million? But if you look at the UK, they have about 1 million apprentices on a base of 65 million people, and in Australia, there's about 400,000 apprentices on a base of 23 million people. So, if you apply that to the US, where there's 500,000 on 330 million people, you can see where the opportunity, is if you apply those numbers. Even, Canada. So I think it's achievable. We'll see 4 to 5 million apprentices, and I certainly don't want to take this political. But I do want to say that this week will be a big week for apprenticeships. You'll see a lot of media. The listeners are going to see a lot of mainstream media, particularly tomorrow in Washington. There's a new raft of federal measures being announced at the Department of Labor. And later on, some company executives and business owners are going to get together at the White House and talk about job creation. And what I wanted to say about that is that, regardless of one's own political views, I think that apprenticeship is about one of the only places that the two parties have reached across the aisle and agree on expanding. So I think that's an area that there's, how that will translate to the people listening in today is that's going to spur on, more apprenticeship opportunities, which can only be a good thing. So if there are employers out there, I'd urge you to consider starting up an apprenticeship program. There's plenty of intermediaries out there who are able to help companies. We were talking about Ben Franklin before. There's an organisation, Franklin Apprenticeships, who can work with employers. Great name. I think they thought that one out. And they can help companies in how to scale up or start an apprenticeship program because you don't need to start with a blank sheet of paper. So I think there's opportunities for employers to take on apprentices, and I think there's going to be opportunities for people to undertake apprenticeships.
Thank you. So we have our resources slide here, but on the console on your webinar, we can see that we have all these links for you. The American Institute for Innovative Apprenticeship, the U.S. Department of Labor, and we also have an excerpt from Nicholas's book, Job U. So that's all available for you on your webinar console.
I'm a pretty practical person, Kim. In the back of the book, there's there is a chapter on apprenticeship specifically, but there's also a practical roadmap because I think a lot of listeners, and particularly from some of these questions that we're seeing come in, people are saying, well, how can I find an apprenticeship in my area? And there is a list of websites and it's pretty tough trying to navigate your way out there. There's a lot of information on the internet, And I think we'd note that not all of it is credible. So I think it's about doing research in the area where you live. And I'd say to listeners, talk to some of the employers. I mean, you don't need to make it too complicated. As I said before, there is this skills gap. A lot of companies are looking to hire new people because that's an area where they can really get competitive advantage. I mean, they might be buying products. If you're in the airline industry, people are buying aircraft from the same companies and they're landing at the same airports. But the thing that's going to set those companies apart is their investment in people and their human capital. So I think I'd most definitely start with employers. I do some research online and make sure that the information you're looking at is credible, because there's this wonderful thing called search engine optimization, which is right up your alley as far as career occupations, Kim. And I think it is possible to promote some things that might be called apprenticeship that aren't. So I think it's really important that listeners do their research and do their homework. Once you set your eyes on a target, I mean, don't give up. You need to follow up relentlessly. You need to create some opportunities, and you need to follow up. I mean, just sending an email is probably not going to do it. I mean, you need to become an expert in the industry in which you want to work. You really need to show an employer that you are interested. Maybe go down and, whether it's attend an evening at that workplace or go to a trade fair or just network, genuine networking. I'm not talking about some of this social media networking where you might have an online presence. The art of communication, just go out, meet some people and say, this is what I'm really interested in doing. And to use an Australian expression, there are a lot of employers who will be prepared to give someone a go. Is that an Australian expression?
It must be.
Maybe it is. Yeah, give someone a go. So I think there are employers out there.
Thank you so much. That was so much wonderful information. As your questions are rolling in, we're going to get to them in just a second. I just want to make sure that you're aware of the special offer from Forbes. Today's webinar attendees can get 12 issues of Forbes magazine for just $10, and this offer is for US and Canada only. To take advantage of this offer, please visit forbesmagazine.com/careers, and there is also a link in the resources widget of your webinar console for you to check this out. So thank you so much, and we have lots and lots of great questions coming in.
Okay, so, wow, look at all these questions. Where to start? Kim, you're going to have to pick one for me.
So, Nick, do you believe that a specialization of skills will boost an employee's career move forward than acquiring new generic ones?
Okay, thanks, Paula. Good question. I think that what we're going to see is, a huge customization of jobs, and in a lot of industries, it's really important that people, I suppose, develop a set of parallel skills. So, I'm certainly not suggesting out there, one for you and one for the employer, but I think that it's really important that you develop the skill set to do the job today, but you're always looking how to reboost and brush up on your skills.
So here's another question. How does this apply to people who are over 50 in industries that might be dying, like mall retail?
Okay. I think that, a good industry to look at there, maybe an example there that is trucking. Trucking a few years back was, one of the largest employers in the United States and, in fact, around the world. And, we're facing this technological change where in mine sites today, I was fortunate enough to visit a mine site about 4 weeks back, and they actually had driverless trucks. So if you're a truck driver, maybe, over 50, you might be saying, well, where does my future lie? And, when I ask people and say, well, what is the future for someone who has driven a truck? People say, half tongue-in-cheek, but, half seriously, well, maybe these people might become the drone pilots of the future. But I think that, for people who are in that situation now, it's concerning that there are some jobs in some industries that are most definitely impacted by technological change. So there are some, government-supported websites. There's one called My Skills, My Future, which is specifically designed for people who are in an existing role and looking to transition into a new industry, either by choice or by the fact that their industry is becoming obsolete.
Great. Another question, what's your opinion on finding online apprenticeships?
Finding online apprenticeships. So I gather that means, do you think maybe it means not taking on an apprenticeship and doing the studies online, because that kind of really defeats the classroom based component? I suppose there are some aspects that could be taught online, but maybe what this listener is actually asking is what's the information? And we touched on earlier that not all the information out there is credible, so it's really important to do your research. But finding an apprenticeship online is a great place to start, and it's in fact the same as searching for any other job.
Here's a great question. How can we as a university implement an efficient apprenticeship program?
Okay, well that's really topical. I think that a lot of universities are looking at ways now to remain relevant. I mean, some employers are changing their hiring practices. PwC, Ernst Young, Random House in the UK. Some of those companies have said, well, we don't necessarily want somebody to only apply if they have a 4-year college degree. But there are some occupations where, university-style education is required. And if you look to the UK, you'll see that there's, quite an influx of what's called degree apprenticeships. And that's where, rather than a person undertaking their apprenticeship training at a community college or with a private training provider, they're actually undertaking their off-the-job training component at a university. So I think there's going to be a lot more interest in this space. There's definitely some pilots going on around the world. I know that Australia is piloting degree apprenticeships, and it might not be for every industry and every pathway, but I think that in changing times, it's responsible to look at some of these alternate pathways.
Along the same lines, how can we introduce an apprenticeship program to your current employer? For instance, the energy industry needs so many skills for technical and professional, but there's not enough workers to fill these needs.
Okay, so I think there's really two ways that companies can look at, taking, or there's two reasons why an employer might want to take on an apprentice. The first way is it would probably be more government as a labour market mechanism, that there are large numbers of unemployed people, and it's far better off to have people, this is more talking about youth, having people in entry-level programs. The challenge with government-supported and government-funded apprenticeship or skills-building programs is that if they're heavily subsidised, they tend to fall over when the money stops. So I'm much more of a fan of, the first question that, I ask employers is, what is your skills need? And then a program can be designed around that skills need. And that program will, of course, then become sustainable and would have a long and successful future. And there are, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of intermediary organisations out there, and that's something that you are seeing across the country, that regardless of the industry, I think that companies realise that there's been a lot of work done in this space, not only in the US and in some of the states like California who've had apprenticeship programs running for many years, or South Carolina where they've had a strong track record over the last decade with apprenticeship, but also looking to the UK and looking to Australia and looking to Canada. And, for the US companies, some of these organisations may have apprenticeship programs running in their organisations, but in different arms or different divisions. So I think do some internal research. But apprenticeships are just not for large employers, Kim. They're for small, mid-size employers as well.
Great. So we're getting some questions about specific people. Do you feel that someone with a master's degree would benefit from an apprenticeship?
Right, so I think it's more along the lines of, I have an MBA, and that was something that I did, in my middle career because I felt that I wanted to continue on my education, and I had a burning desire to answer some of those business questions that I wanted to learn. I think regardless of your background or your qualifications, I think if you've got an interest, some of my friends say, Nick, don't use that word passion. I mean, there is the reality that, you do need to, pay for your apartment and pay to put food on the table. But, I am a believer in passion. And I think that, if you are passionate and you've got an interest in an industry, regardless of your background, I think check it out, see if it's for you, see if you, are able to, get into an industry, talk to some people and give it a try. There's also opportunities to, as it were, try before you buy. There's a thing called a pre-apprenticeship, which is also available, which is becoming more popular as well.
Great. So someone wants to know, what are the concrete steps for obtaining an apprenticeship?
It's pretty competitive out there. And I think that, you really have to hone in what it is you want to do before you talk to an employer. I'm an employer myself. I employ 600. I didn't mention that actually. I employ 600 apprentices at any given time. And when young people come into our company, or people looking for work, and they tick every box, a bit like the poll I suggested before. When they tick every box, what field are you interested in working in? As an employer, it's a bit of a turn-off because you sort of feel, well, look, this is not career guidance. I've got a business to run. You really want someone to come through the door and say, I'm really interested in working with people, and I really would like to work in the medical industry. I think an employer would be very receptive to that. So I think the first thing you've got to do is, really, understand what it is that you're interested in. And then I think you need to do your research will be the next step, and then really map out a plan. And, piece of paper, do it online, do it in an app. But you need to be organised because you need to track the conversations that you have with people and, follow up always in all ways. So, you certainly don't want to stalk people. I wouldn't recommend stalking employers, but I think you want to mindfully follow people up. And just make sure that email hasn't got, accidentally dropped into the spam folder. And I think, solid employers would respect that.
What advice would you have for someone who's maybe later in their career, maybe 60s? Would an employer want to hire someone who's at that stage?
In an apprenticeship, I think that, I think the answer is there's always a possibility. But, I'd be saying that somebody who, is in their 60s has a lot of life experience, and that's something that's really valuable to a lot of employers today. So maybe your way to engage with apprenticeship is, not actually undertaking an apprenticeship, but it might actually becoming a mentor. And I should have said that I have a mentor, and a call out to Patty if she's listening out there. I have a person who talks to me about my career and talks to me about what I'm interested in and my company. And I'd recommend to everybody out there, if you can find a mentor, it doesn't have to be a formal arrangement, but all the apprentices that I mentioned that I employ, every single one of them, Kim, has a one-on-one dedicated mentor. And statistics have shown that if somebody has a mentor to be able to talk to, and I'm not talking about their direct line supervisor or manager. I'm talking about someone they can talk to about some of the challenges. They've got a much higher chance of actually completing that apprenticeship.
How does someone go about finding a mentor? Is it usually a program where you match people up, or are these, do you have any advice for finding one on your own?
Right. Well, look, finding one on your own. So, look, I think a lot of employers, have mentor opportunities. And I mentioned earlier the PTech program. All the PTech students have access to a mentor, and that's through an online platform called Mentor Place. But I think there is definitely some software out there to match employees to employers. In a sort of a safe environment. You want to make sure you check out who it is who's actually giving you the advice. But it's highly likely it's probably not going to be a relative, a family member. They're probably the last person I'd go and get some mentoring advice from. I know my 13-year-old really doesn't like to get too much advice from dad. So I'd be recommending, look outside your network. But I think just once again, ask and talk to people, and the old art of communication is alive and well.
This question comes from someone who's looking to change careers. How would someone trained in one industry go about acquiring an apprenticeship in another? Let's say they want to change from biochemistry to finance.
Right. Well, I think there is the commercial reality, as I said before. I think it's worth trying before you buy. You do hear of, sea changes, and there's tree changes. Is that an Australian thing? A tree changer? That must be another Australian thing. These are people who kind of drop out of the large cities and, want to go and pursue a dream, and get in touch with nature, which is a great aspiration, but, it's pretty hard to pay the bill sometimes with some of those dreams. So I think it's really important to check it out first, do your homework, and don't be misled. There's a bit of information out there, particularly in my space, or my former space in the culinary world. We get so many young people who are applying for jobs to be apprentice chefs, and they think it's about putting 3-star Michelin plates on the pass, like one of these reality television shows. But the reality is, from someone who's been there, is that's far from reality. There is a lot of peeling onions. There is a lot of, repetitious work, particularly learning knife skills so that you, go home with all your fingers. These are important skills to master early on as a chef. So I think, it's really important, to sort of really look around and do your homework, do your research.
This question comes from someone who's looking to re-enter the workforce. How do you get past age bias, and would an apprenticeship help more mature workers?
Look, definitely. Gee, this is like the question marathon. I might have to have a drink here. I mean, it's great. There's so many questions, and I have noticed, a bit of a trend that Kim, there's a lot of people who, seem to be mid-career, and I think, as I said earlier, one of the turn-offs for employers with younger people, with school leavers, is that quite often they lack some world and life experience, and reliability is huge for employers. So I'd say to mid-career workers, play to your strengths. Write down all the different skills that you've acquired in your current occupation, and then see which of those are transferable. And I think you'll find that employers are, pretty open-minded. I know as an employer myself, I like the people who show up on time. I like that. I like reliability. I like people who ask questions. And I'm not saying, this is a negative for young people, but for mid-career people, I think you should really play to your strengths, and that's one great way to do it.
I'll let you take a drink here. What advice do you have for a technical professional who is interested in becoming a manager? Is there an apprenticeship track that would lead to a manager or CEO role?
Well, I think anything's possible. I think that, I think there is no set pathway or qualification. If somebody has an aspiration to lead or lead an organisation, I think that it's interesting. It's not everyone's aspiration, funnily enough, to become or want to become a CEO. I know that there's a misconception. It's not everybody's aspiration to earn a six-figure salary. For a lot of people, it's about being happy, and I say that to a lot of parents. After NPR yesterday, my Twitter went crazy with people saying, what's some advice for my son, or what's some advice for my daughter? And, a blanket answer is what makes them happy. I don't want to get too philosophical about the whole thing, but, why push someone into a pathway or direction that doesn't make them happy? So I think ultimately you've got to find something that makes you happy, and then look at how you're going to achieve that. And so, it's not all about money. I think there's the commercial reality of it. But for some people, there's a huge artisan comeback, as you'd see. You can always see what the trends are by looking at reality television. I keep talking about reality television. I got it on the brain today. But, there's my 7-year-old son is obsessed by this television program where people actually forge pieces of steel into, medieval weapons. I don't know about the whole weapons thing, but I think it's really interesting to note that, there is an interest in, the ways of furniture making, and there's a school in Boston which I'd recommend people check out called North Bennett Street School. Look at some of the things you can do there. You can study piano technology. So when you think about it, you can't just sort of drop your grand piano by to get serviced, like you would your iPhone and get a new screen. Somebody has to actually go to the concert halls and tune these pianos. So that's a skilled occupation. Or the person who makes some of the individual pieces of jewellery for, jewellers like Tiffany's or something like that. These are all skilled occupations that people might not think about.
Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone, and thank you, Nick, for such wonderful information. I think we're going to wrap it up right now. And I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. As you exit the webinar, please take a moment to answer a brief survey so we can plan some more Level Up webinars in the future, and stay in touch by liking us on Facebook and by joining our exclusive LinkedIn group. And please follow Nick on Twitter.
Yeah, Nicholas_Wyman, and it's been a pleasure to to answer the questions and to come into the studio and talk to you today, Kim. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.